What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and this is another installment of the best armies in Warhammer 40k. This is the weekly video series where we talk about undefeated lists from GT and major level events from the past weekend every Monday. And this is an exciting one because we have some results coming from the new codexes, and this one in specific being Necrons. We're back on Facecam today because I was streaming a game earlier, but that's neither here nor there because we are talking about undefeated lists. Now, with the holidays approaching, competitive events are a little bit on the wane right now, so we don't have too many results to talk about, but what we'll do is dive into some XO1 lists that have a draw on their record, and talk a little bit in depth about a new Necron list that was undefeated at one of this weekend's larger events. And jumping into the Metagame Breakdown, because it was such a small sample size this week, we didn't see too many factions dominating the leaderboards. Chaos Space Marines still lead the way as what is likely the strongest faction in the game currently, with 2 undefeated results. All other factions had a single undefeated result. Moving on to other Chaos Space Marine sub-factions, we also saw Death Guard in there, as well as Space Marines in 3 different varieties, a classic Space Marine Codex list, alongside Blood Angels and Black Templars with an XO1 record, with Imperial Knights going undefeated at the Navideño event, and Sororitas going undefeated at the Carnage Open Slay. Xenos also saw some results with not only an Eldar undefeated, but also Necrons from that Rise of an Empire GT. Now, speaking of Rise of an Empire, we will talk about them first and the Chaos Space Marine list that took down that event 6-0. Necrons did take first place. Chaos Space Marines were also undefeated and just came in second place based on tiebreakers, but had the same record. This list is basically what we are to expect from Chaos Space Marines right now. It is essentially just the cookie cutter cutting edge of the metagame for this faction. In fact, it is, I think, just Manny Chima's list from the World Championships Warhammer. So I have a whole video about it down there. It's not really worth talking too much additional about it. I talk about it in depth in my video about Manny Chima and his win at the World Championships Warhammer. So you can go look at that, I guess, and then hear me talk about Chaos Space Marines for like 30 minutes. Death Guard took down the Navideño individual ranked event. Now, this event was 70 players, but only went 5 rounds, meaning that there were multiple undefeateds at the end of the event. There were 4 total undefeateds with multiple X&1 records. The first one is going to be from Monedita Gonzalez, who was playing a Plague Company detachment, running 2 Foul Blight Spawns and 2 Biologus Putrifiers. Those were jumping into 2 units of Plague Marines, of which we have 1 big brick of 10 and 4 bricks of 5. Those guys are going to be split up between 3 rhinos. 1 gets the 10-man, and 2 of them getting the 2 5-men. Those are backed up by some fire support from 3 Plague Burst Crawlers, some Objective Control Friends in the Death Guard Cultists, 3 War Dog Brigands to add some non-Nurgle fire support. The big benefit of the Death Guard index currently is that all of their special abilities and debuffs just about affect enemy models, but don't care about who the attacking model is. Meaning that War Dog Brigands benefit from the -1 saving throw, -1 toughness auras that Death Guard can project, and can even be protected by -1 to be hit. On top of that, Nurglings have a -1 to hit effect that stacks on top of the Death Guard 1 proper, so they have a lot of play with the faction and are incredibly cheap utility units on top of that. Pretty standard stuff for Death Guard. Oftentimes we'll see a greater emphasis on the characters and less on the Plague Burst Crawlers, but it's nice to see that a little bit more of a heavily armored approach is also good for the faction. This is a lot of armor for a Death Guard army, running 3 Rhinos, 3 War Dogs, and 3 Plague Burst Crawlers. That's a tough nut to crack. Space Marines took down the Novogonye Hyper GT. This was an event on the smaller side, but was won by Nikolay Shikin, who was playing an Ironstorm Spearhead. This list was rocking a Combi Weapon Lieutenant and 3 Tech Marines, the triumvirate of enhancements that empower the Ironstorm Spearhead. Those being Target Augury Web for lethal hits, Master of Machine War for advance and fallback and shoots, and Adept of the Omnissiah for a blanked damage. You get a mobility increase, defense increase, and offense increase, all for the low cost of about 80 points plus 3 characters, so it is kind of expensive. That said, that was all supporting 2 Ballistus Dreadnoughts, 3 Redemptor Dreadnoughts, and a Repulsor Executioner, alongside a Whirlwind as the brick of vehicles that was going to be bearing down the table and bullying the midboard. We have a lot of long-range shooting between those ballistic dreadnoughts and lancers alongside the repulsor executioner, and a lot of midboard control with the 3 redemptor dreadnoughts as well, being ridiculously difficult to kill, with potential -1 AP from Armor of Contempt, -1 damage from their own inbuilt ability, and a damage blank thanks to Adept of the Omnissiah. We then had 2 units of Inceptors and a unit of Scouts in order to score some points for the army, and all told, that is a classic Ironstorm loadout. Seems pretty solid. Now, we also saw some undefeated armies from other Space Marine factions as well, including Alejandro Mancuso Serrano, who went undefeated at the Navideño ranked event with a Blood Angels list. This list was a classic Gladius task force, making use of some of Blood Angels' unique special units. This included Lamarties in a big unit of 10 Death Company with jump packs. We also had a second unit of 5 as well to support them. We had a Librarian Dreadnought that had multiple units to use its Wings of Sanguinius on to redeploy, including a big Aggressor squad alongside an Apothecary Biologus with the Fire Discipline combo, giving the unit on Devastator Doctrine turns a 5+ lethal and sustained effect on their guns. I have a whole video talking about the math of this effect, and it is absolutely nuts. This unit can shoot almost anything to death in one go. We also had a Lieutenant with Combi Weapon and a Centurion Devastator Squad, another option for that Librarian Dreadnought to pick up and throw across the table. Getting multiple units that you can either put into position to charge in future turns or even try long bomb charges on that turn, and also get angles with ranged attacks with units like the Centurion Devastators and Aggressors makes Blood Angels uniquely good at running a highly mobile gun line that has incredible melee prowess backing it up with those Death Company Marines. We also saw 3 units of Inceptors in this list, alongside 3 units of Scouts to add some utility and scoring. Altogether, this creates an incredibly mobile list that has tons of deep striking, tons of mobility, tons of proactive effects, and overall seems pretty great. Now, we also saw a similar build out of Johan Norman at the Grimdark 18 event. Johan was running a Gladius task force, this time out of Black Templars, however. He was running High Marshal Helbrecht, backed up by 2 captains, one of them with the Honor Vehement. Those were supporting a massive number of Crusader squads. 6 total Crusader squads, all of these rocking a Multi-Melta and Meltagun for mass anti-tank shooting. The characters were joined into Sword Brethren squads. We had 3 Sword Brethren squads that were able to be led by those characters. Those 3 Sword Brethren squads were then going to be mounted into 3 Black Templars Impulsors. That is the special variety of Impulsor that Black Templars can have that mounts a Multi-Melta on the top for the low cost of 5 points. We also had 3 Rhinos for the Crusader squads as well, and you can fire the heavy weapons in those Crusade squads out the firing deck of the Rhino on top of that. So this list is bringing immense numbers of highly efficient, highly lethal melee troops, all of them inside of Rhinos, to abuse the transport mechanics to their utmost extent. We then had 3 units of Space Marine Scouts, as well as a standard Inquisitor. Now, the Inquisitor is an interesting inclusion because he adds some command point regen that Black Templars don't otherwise have access to. With the captains being able to duplicate a stratagem, you can get a free strat with Rites of Battle once per round, but the Inquisitor can actually regenerate CP on a 3+ if spent on his unit. He also comes with a pretty dangerous Psychic Torrent with Devastating Wounds, which is kind of nice to have, but whether or not he's being used for his abilities to buff his unit or deal damage versus being just a cheap independent model, I don't know. And 2 Inceptor squads, one with Assault Bolters and one with Plasma Exterminators as well. I've talked at length about how powerful transports are in 10th edition 40k, and this list is trying to use them to the best of its ability. We also see some of the most efficient infantry units in the game, at least sort of line infantry units and melee infantry units within Black Templars. Sword Brethren are ridiculously powerful, they hit insanely hard, and Crusader squads are incredibly cheap. You get a special weapon and a heavy weapon in a 5-man squad for only 65 points, and then can put them in a transport and fire that off the top of the transport. It's hard to deal with, they're very good at scoring, and they're hyper efficient. And all told, that makes a pretty dangerous list that rocks a ton of units, so it can score tactical or even fixed action secondaries incredibly easily. Now, moving on to some of the other factions, we can talk about Imperial Knights next. These guys also saw a 4-0-1 record at the Navideño ranked event, kind of aping a lot of Chaos Knight builds that we've been watching do well recently. This list was running a single Knight Warden. No enhancements on this guy, just the Warden himself. Now, the Warden is a fairly well-rounded profile. It has a melee attack, either a Thunderstrike Gauntlet or a Reaper Reaper Chainsword. This one running the Reaper Chainsword, and then also gets a ranged weapon on its other. Its ranged weapons get devastating wounds when targeting non-monsters or vehicles, which is largely going to be impactful against mounted or infantry units, and especially heavy infantry. Getting devastating wounds is a big deal. Something like Terminators or Aggressors have high armor saves and good toughness values, and devastating wounds, just punching through all of that, makes these guys pretty good at a wide variety of profiles. Since they can punch armored stuff to death, they can shoot infantry to death, and they can help solve that heavy infantry problem that armigers sometimes have, because their thermal lances aren't that great at punching through those infantry. They're good against heavily armored targets, but not necessarily multi-wound targets, because they can be very swingy. On top of that, it also has good follow-up with melee. Not only that, but it also has a bondsman ability for -1 damage, so it's going to be making these armigers more difficult to kill, which is really the downside of armigers in the metagame right now. They do have a feel no pain baked in, which is solid, and toughness 10 is pretty good, but armigers do go down pretty quickly, and having that -1 damage effect is super useful. Now, what is it going on? We do have 6 Armiger Warglaives and 3 Armiger Helverins. Like I said, this is basically becoming a Chaos Knights list where we're spamming War Dogs, except this time they are the Imperium variety. We also had in the Allies slot a Calidus Assassin alongside 2 units of Inquisitorial Henchmen to score some points. Very different variety of Imperial Knights than we've seen in recent times, and that's really cool. We haven't really seen Imperial Knights do too well in the last couple of weeks, and it's nice to see them up here in the undefeated brackets, especially with a list that isn't really something that we've seen too often. Now with that, we can return to Grimdark 18 and talk about the other Knight variety that also went undefeated at that event. Sebastian Larson took Chaos Knights to an undefeated record. Largely, it is basically what we are expected from Chaos Knights. We have 2 Wardog Huntsmen. That's a little bit of a departure. Usually we either see only Brigands or only Carnivores, but we're throwing some Huntsmen in there alongside 3 Wardog Carnivores, 6 Wardog Brigands, and 1 Wardog Stalker with Aura of Terror. That's backed up by 4 Nurgling Swarms to score secondaries, and that's the list. It is a classic Chaos Knights build, and I don't have much else to say about it. Wardogs are great. If you can't deal with toughness 10, you lose. If you can't deal with toughness 10, they might lose. So it's kind of up to how well-rounded you build your list. Now we'll talk about Adepta Sororitas next at the Carnage Open Slay event, where Scott Morris took the faction to first place with a 5-0 record. Scott was running a Dialogus as well as an Imagifier Morvenval and the Triumph of St. Catherine. We then have 2 Battle Sister squads. Those are all kitted out with multi-melt. We have a unit of Arcoflagellants, 2 Castigators, 1 Sororitas Rhino, probably to keep the Arcoflagellants in if I had to hazard a guess. We had a Crusader squad, 2 Exorcists, and a unit of 3 Paragon Warsuits for Morvenval to join into, alongside some multi-melt to support from a Retributor squad, 3 units of Seraphim, and a unit of Dominions. Now, one thing that's interesting is that the Dominions can allow the Rhino to scout, so we could put them inside the Rhino and move it up the table early in order to get it up into a better position. That Retributor squad is the home for the Dialogus because it is a good recipient of the Dialogus and Triumph of St. Catherine combo. It allows you to use multiple Miracle Dice thanks to the Triumph of St. Catherine and turn them all to 6s thanks to the Dialogus ability. For multi-melt, this is a pretty good place to sit that. Only 1 result from Aeldari this week is kind of surprising because they have put up multiple undefeated results basically every week of the edition so far, but it is a little bit of a lighter weekend, so we probably didn't see the same breadth of Aeldari players as we do on a heavier one. This list was running a Farseer alongside a Spirit Seer with Fate's Messenger, Fuegan the Firelord, and the Incarn. That was backed up by a unit of Rangers, a unit of Shadow Specters, 3 units of Warp Spiders, alongside 3 Night Spitters and a Wraithguard unit. If you have seen Eldar played, then you know what this list does, so we can probably move on, because it is very similar to lists that Eldar have been playing literally since the edition began, so not too much exciting stuff going on there. What is exciting, however, is the last list that we're going to talk about today, and we're going to dive a little bit deeper into it than we normally do. This being Necrons from Rise of an Empire. Necrons were piloted by the perennial GT top favorite Colin McDade, who was running a Canoptek Court detachment. Now, for those who don't know, Canoptek Court has a really interesting suite of abilities. It gives you an effect that apes the Chaos Demon's Shadow of Chaos mechanic. Depending on the position of the table and the number of objectives you control, you have an effect called Power Matrix. Power Matrix gives your Cryptek and Canoptek units, and in this case, it is going to be almost exclusively 3 units of Canoptek Wraiths, full hit rerolls as long as you control at least half of the objectives in that zone. In this case, if you control at least half the objectives in the center of the table, and your unit is wholly within that center area, within the no man's land, and not inside either player's deployment zone, you'll get full hit rerolls. If it's wholly within your deployment zone, you'll get full hit rerolls. And if you control the objective in your opponent's deployment zone, similarly, you will get full hit rerolls. If you do not have your power matrix empowered, however, it still gives you a bonus. You get reroll ones to hit, so not converting into full rerolls, but still kind of nice, although the base Canoptek weapon skill and ballistic skill characteristics are usually fairly low, so reroll ones isn't that great unless you can fully empower it to full rerolls. Once that full reroll is online, however, this ability goes absolutely crazy, and it checks each single phase. So as long as you can move up to an objective and grab that objective by the start of your shooting or fight phase, then that will be considered for whether or not your power matrix is online for then that subsequent shooting or fight phase. Now, Colin was focusing most of the abilities from the detachment itself on these Canoptek Wraiths. Canoptek Wraiths are an incredibly beefy body. They're a 3+ armor save, 4+ invulnerable save, 4 wound tank, and they can get a feel no pain from an attached Technomancer, which Colin does have 3 of to attach to his 3 units of 6 Wraiths. Especially with rerolls, the Wraiths themselves slap pretty hard. They get a Particle Caster, which is a devastating wounds weapon, as well as a bevy of melee attacks, these ones being 2 damage vicious claws, and they get a grip of some of the strongest stratagems in Warhammer 40k for a specific unit keyword. This includes a 6-inch reactive move and a lone operative effect in response to targeting. That makes these Canoptek Wraiths ridiculously difficult to get a handle on. You're not necessarily allowed to shoot them with all your guns. You're not necessarily allowed to charge them or get up close and personal to them in order to actually kill them. And if you don't kill the unit, their reanimation protocols will trigger, and even if you do get a shot on them, they're going to be tough to kill, because again, that full unit has 24 wounds with a feel no pain as long as they have that attached character. So they're tanky, they hit relatively hard, and they're very good for taking table space. Now, the downside is that their strength profiles aren't that good, so they're not amazing at cracking armor, although they will fight infantry all day long. What is good at cracking armor, however, are Catan Shards, and this list features no less than 3 of them. Now, Catan Shards got a huge buff in the new codex. That being, they now have a built-in 5+ feel no pain. Whereas previously you could get 1 Transcendent Catan within an Awakened Dynasty, a 4+ feel no pain, which was incredibly good, and was one of the most difficult units in the game to remove, or at least the most difficult single models. Now all Catan have this ability built in. So while you can't supercharge one single Catan because they are no longer eligible to receive enhancements, you can take a lot more of them and have that damage be spread across your different Catan characters. Now, on top of a standard Transcendent Catan that gives the list a little bit more maneuverability by teleporting itself around the table whenever you need to score objectives on an advance roll, it also ran a Catan Shard of the Nightbringer as well as a Shard of the Void Dragon. These both bring pretty solid ranged attacks as well as some mortal wound generating abilities, plus multi-damage melee attacks at high strength. So they're both good at dealing with heavy armor that the Canoptek Wraiths might not be able to deal with themselves. So while you have these Wraiths skirmishing around the middle, being difficult to shoot, being difficult to pin down, and incredibly hard to kill, one of them is also going to be forward deploying thanks to Dimensional Sanctum. Those are frontlining for these 3 Catan Shards that are going to be beelining towards your opponent's most dangerous units. Once you get the Nightbringer or the Void Dragon into things like big heavy vehicles or heavy tanks, they will clear them out easily, and your Canoptek Wraiths can eat whatever's inside. Now, on top of that, we also had some utility units, including 1 Hexmark Destroyer, 1 Locust Heavy Destroyer with a Gauss Destructor, 1 unit of 5 Flayed Ones for some additional infiltrating. And the interesting thing about the Flayed One unit is that you can use it to screen out a position against enemy infiltrators, where you can then place your Canoptek Wraiths that are infiltrating thanks to that Sanctum. So you can get a lot of forward board presence with just those 2 units, which is really nice. You then also have 2 units of Tomb Blades to add scouts as well, and more utility. So this list is good at killing a wide variety of enemy profiles. It's incredibly resilient, incredibly hard to kill, lots of tricks within this list, and it has some hitting power as well. Overall, the Canoptek Court is far and away, in my opinion, the strongest detachment in the Necron Codex. The stratagems that it has alone are incredibly powerful. That said, it is a little bit limited in its scope to those Canoptek units, and it's interesting to see units like the Catan kind of picking up the slack for the weaknesses of those Canoptek stat lines. It'll be really interesting to see how this codex evolves as the season moves on, once we move further into the 2024 season, and whether or not Canoptek Court remains on top, or whether we're going to see some other detachments take the fore. Now, that said, there probably won't be too many results for the next couple of weeks thanks to the holidays, but once we're back in January, oh boy, it's going to be exciting. Now, with that in mind, I don't know if I'm going to have an episode to talk about next week. It depends entirely on whether or not GTs and majors happen. If I am not back by then I hope you have a happy holiday and enjoy your time off from competitive 40k. But once we're back in, don't you worry, I will be back talking about these undefeated lists. Big thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Thanks as well to everybody who supports the channel, either over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, YouTube channel members, and Twitch subscribers. All you people are great. I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.